everyone, and welcome to the TESOL-MALL KOTESOL DCC Symposium of 2020. And I hope everybody is doing well and staying safe and sane and healthy in these interesting times. And it's unfortunate that we're not all able to be together for these presentations that will be happening as a part of this symposium. But thank you very much for checking in to my presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. Just a quick personal introduction. My name is James. I've worked at Woosong University here in Daejeon for the last 11 years. The last 7, I've been the interdepartmental English teacher in the Department of Hotel and Tourism Management at the university. Altogether, I have 13 years of teaching experience in the ROK. My educational background is BA in English Lit and History from Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. I also have a Bachelor of Education from the University of Ottawa, and recently completed my MA from St. Cloud State University in ESL and EFL education. And that was a part of the Woosong University St. Cloud State dual degree program. And I believe I'll be getting my dual degree in August of 2020. The topic of my presentation today is ethnographies. And ethnographies are something that I was forced to do as a part of my MA program at St. Cloud State. And as much work as it turned out to be, it turned out to be one of the most rewarding experiences I had as a student. And now, as someone who is a professional living in a foreign country and in a foreign culture from my upbringing, I think the concept of ethnography is a very exciting one for people who are interested in producing research that goes beyond the sort of quantitative educational experiments and studies that are many and aplenty throughout the canon of literature, and that are all very useful in their own right. But an ethnography by nature is a longitudinal qualitative study that allows one to learn and describe what one has learned. And in essence, an ethnography is describing and relating and trying to understand social interactions and behaviors that occur within communities and organizations. And communities and organizations are a broad blanket term that can accompany any sort of description of a group of people anywhere in the world at any time. And subsequently, there have been ethnographies published on a vast variety of different groups and modes of human organization and groupings. Everything from ethnographies have been published relating the experiences of a hospital staff at an inner city hospital in the United States, to white supremacist groups in Montana, to homeless people, to, of course, the famous ethnographies that came about in sort of a golden age of Western anthropology, where new societies and new communities of people were being discovered by the West and interrogated and studied and looked at. The most popularly famous ethnography was Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead, which was later criticized as being largely made up. But it was a big one in the anthropology industry. Another one that has sort of had more staying power would be Richard Lee's work on the Kung people of the Kalahari Desert. And again, an ethnography doesn't have to be about a vast, large culture of people. What an ethnography is about a group of people. And in every society on Earth, there is the macro culture, but there are the microcultures that exist within this. And what I would like to talk about today is not so much discovering a new culture that has not come into contact with technology and Western mentality, but rather looking at what we call subcultures within the existing strata of the society that we live in, which is modern day South Korea or the Republic of Korea. So let's look at the idea of what a subculture is. We're all familiar with this term, and it has different connotations depending on where you hear it or where you think of it. The assumption is that any subculture is by very nature nonconformist and rebellious. And that does have a shred of truth throughout the Western world. But again, each culture has its own subcultures within it, and its nonconformity from the rest of society is all relative. I mean, the most popular subcultures, and I'm just throwing this out here off the top of my head, would be like, punks, graffiti artists. Let's go into a occupational subculture: bike couriers, bicycle teams, skinheads. Okay, that's more of a lifestyle subculture. Within the LGBTQ community, there are a number of subcultures that exist. English teachers in East Asia, they also represent a subculture, a group of people who live their own life by their own rules and by their own understood experience with the reality that they live in. To be honest, I mean, the list of subcultures that one could come up with simply by Googling or going on the internet, and even the list of subcultures that have been written about in completed ethnographies is almost infinite. It's occupational, it's lifestyle, it's hobbies, it's everything. And so the wonderful thing about an ethnography is that the doors are wide open for the researcher to study any sort of element of the society that he or she is in, that they are interested in. But of course, the question is always, how does one begin to approach a project like an ethnography? So what I want to very briefly go over is sort of the Bible of ethnographies, the sort of how-to, which was published by James P. Spradley in 1979. And this is a book called The Ethnographic Interview, and it's pretty dense, and it gets into a lot of things that for a basic research project on a subculture, you may not have to follow all the steps that he looks into, but it's an excellent guide for somebody who's interested in doing a longitudinal study on a subculture or on a group of people, to make a sort of cultural study. And the beautiful thing about James Spradley's book is that he's got a 12-step program, and you don't even have to admit that you have the problem first. You can just follow his steps to approaching your ethnography or your cultural study in a way that is going to be interesting for you and interesting for the person who reads this if you plan to get it published or whatnot. And you can see here there's 12 steps. And the key terms that I'd like to look at, obviously informant is the person that you are going to get a relationship with, that's going to help you and give you information. Interviewing, making an ethnographic record. Spradley is very, very detailed in what he thinks that one should do when doing an ethnography. What I'm going to focus on is the less obvious steps in his guide to making an ethnography. There's descriptive questions, there's a domain analysis, there are structural questions, there's a taxonomic analysis, contrast questions, componential analysis, and the most exciting thing is discovering cultural themes. And the very last step, of course, is actually writing your ethnography. But instead of going through each step 1 to 12, I'm just going to look at the more vague aspects of Mr. Spradley's book and give you some insight. And then I'm going to show you an example of an ethnography that I completed using his idea, his 12-step program to do so. So let's say you want to do an ethnography on delivery guys in the east end of Daejeon. God, I want to do that. That sounds great. Those are the guys that race around on motorcycles all weekend and all week, delivering Chinese food and pizza and tteokbokki to different people staying at their home. How are you going to go about doing this? And of course, the first step is to meet one, which is easy enough to do. In Daejeon, for example, they hang out at CUs and 7-Elevens, waiting for their next run to happen. So what you want to do is meet an informant and get to know him. And of course, I understand that there are linguistic and language issues to deal with, but even within that situation, you'd be amazed at how much information you can pick up just by being curious and asking questions in Korean or in English. So according to Dr. Spradley, I mean, the first question is to the first set of questions to get into are the descriptive questions, and to get your informant to describe things and get to know somebody. And this is based on establishing rapport with your informant or with a group of people. Spradley lists 5 different kinds of questions that you might ask to an informant, and one is grand tour questions. Those are, what's a typical night? What's a typical Friday night for a guy delivering pizza for Pizza Hut from Daejeon? Or what's a typical night for you riding your motorcycle around the east end of Daejeon? Mini tour questions are, please describe to me what a rude customer is like. Question number 3, example questions. Give me an example of. Number 4 is experience questions. Tell me, what are your experiences delivering Chinese food during the monsoon rains? Native language questions use terms and phrases commonly associated with the scene. Because every scene, every subculture has their own lingo and slang and ideas. So these questions are intended to show that you understand their lingo, understand their language, and getting them to describe something within their experience, within their own native subcultural terminology. The next step after having an interview using descriptive questions is to get into what Dr. Spradley calls domain analysis, which is merely just establishing semantic relationships within the culture you are studying, or uncovering categories of meaning, which are very important in terms of understanding where your informant is coming from and what he or she is telling you. Then structural questions are used to complement the descriptive questions. Those are the can you tell me the difference between, or what are the different, or can you think of any other examples of that which we are discussing? And those are what are called structural questions, which would be a different step in his ethnographic process. At that point, you would want to undergo a sort of taxonomic analysis. Taxonomy, of course, is a science associated with classification. We all know Bloom's taxonomy. We've heard that. And all that is classifying information and sorting things out to approximate the way or people organize their cultural information. That leads you to the next set of questions that you should be asking. There are contrast questions, 7 kinds. And contrast questions, contrast is just to determine a difference. So contrast verification is just to confirm differences in terms. And in terms, I'm talking about the language that your informant or the people that you're interacting with are using to describe their cultural surroundings. Directed contrast questions determines that there's a difference between this type of thing and that type of thing within their reality. Dyadic is difference between the folk terms. Again, using the slang, using lingo. Every subculture, every culture has their own terminology for determining certain kind of things. We as English teachers talk in idiomatic English to our students all the time. This is a question of describing and explaining and getting your informant to describe and explain what the differences are between the folk terms that he or she is using. Triadic is just the differences between 3 things. Contrast set sorting is whether differences or similarities are more important. 20 questions, we've all played that game. Guess the object, you have 20 questions. Is it this? Is it that? These are interview questions you can ask your informant to create greater meaning from the story that they're trying to tell you. And ratings questions are, again, just simply putting things into importance on the basis of what your informant is trying to tell you. What Dr. Spradley refers to as a componential analysis is simply organizing the contrast that you've established from your contrast questions in a systematic fashion in order to further gain meaning, so that essentially you are understanding where your informant, where your interviewee is coming from. And that's how you follow the steps before you begin creating a final ethnographic written piece. Now, I engaged on this a few years ago. This is not recent, but back in 2015. And what I attempted to do using Dr. Spradley's formula, his 12 steps, was to write a cultural translation, which is what an ethnography is, after collecting interview data, and to investigate a subculture within South Korea, and to follow all of his steps. And what I decided to do was follow and look into and investigate and learn about the subculture of Korean Latin dancing, which you may or may not know is a very popular thing here. And in fact, dancing culture is a big part of the culture that we live in here in Korea. And Latin dancing, there are clubs all over Daejeon, all over South Korea that are committed to this, and they're a big thing. So I wanted to apply for my ethnography project, the principles of Dr. Spradley, to learning more about salsa dancing in South Korea. So thanks to my wife, who is an avid salsa dancer, I was able to meet her friend KOTESOL, whose nickname is Neo, who is a good friend of mine, who became my informant, and he's a member of the salsa club that my wife belongs to, and I was able to embark on a study of Korean salsa and Latin dancing culture here. I formally interviewed Neo on 5 occasions, and these are the dates, and you can see the times. And the reason why the times are recorded is because I transcribed each and every interview. That's not necessary for doing an ethnography, but in this case it was. And as you can see, it was just 5 meetings spaced out over 2 months. We could have probably done all of this in 1 or 2 meetings, but that's just the way it was. The first meeting was just a general overview of what salsa dancing in Daejeon was like, and I was looking just on general information and personal information, getting to know him. Hey man, what do you think? What are you doing? Some of the terms that I utilized from Spradley's work would be hypothesized domains, which is just related to the domain analysis and semantic relationships, and just making sure that terminology that I felt I was familiar with was in fact correct. Cover terms are just a category of cultural knowledge. Again, to be confirmed. Included terms is slang, okay, and it's just a question of familiarizing myself with how somebody belonging to a certain club doing a certain thing, how they would talk. For the second interview, I just worked strictly on the descriptive questions, and I created a cultural inventory. This was just terminology, getting to know what people are saying to me when they're talking to me. And that's an important thing, is to we all take things for granted when we have discussions and even casual conversations with people, but when you're making an interview, it's important to have a cultural inventory where you're putting all the terminology that you may or may not be familiar with into a basket. For the third interview, it was then taking that cultural framework principle and being able to talk one-on-one on a more knowledgeable basis, and then bringing out the structural questions to get more details. After that, I did do a domain analysis and a taxonomic analysis. That's not necessary. For the fourth interview, I focused on structural and contrast questions exclusively. The fifth interview was a question of synthesizing the information that my informant was providing to me and beginning to develop the cultural themes that would then lead to me writing the final ethnography. And writing the ethnography was the most fun thing, was to bring it all together after 5 interviews, transcribing and all that other stuff. But you know, it didn't take a long time for me to sort of develop a thesis that I could work with. which were, as you can read, the social aspects of the scene are the most important. Neo, my informant, danced because he wanted to meet people, but also his participation in the Salsa Club was very much in line with the concept of Korean collectivism and the larger norms and values of the society that he works and lives in. So it was really exciting for me, after talking with him and approaching all of the questions very structurally and very formally, to then sort of have this new insight into him as a person and into the whole Salsa Club routine, which I hadn't really thought that much about prior to that. So I wrote an introduction. My introduction was just an overview of modern South Korea, talking about the structured nature of its leisure organizations and clubs. I talked about the growing popularity of Latin dancing. I gave an introduction to the Salsa Club that Neo belonged to, but this was not a lit review that required that much. It all came about just from interpersonal communication with Neo. So the whole point of doing a research project is to come to some sort of conclusion, and I know you're all totally thrilled to hear what my conclusions were from an ethnography, and I'm going to give them to you, but the main lesson to take away from this is these were conclusions that were not based on anything more than interacting with another human being. So I came up with economic themes. For example, salsa dancing is an inexpensive way for young to middle-aged Koreans to lead an active social life. People pay for lessons in social dancing, but members of that club that they belong to, they get a discount. There's great social pressure on Korean men in particular, like my informant Neo. He's got to save money, he's got to buy an apartment, and he's got to take care of his future wife and child, regardless of how modern and progressive contemporary Korean society is. These are still the pressures that he's dealing with. So economics is a big part of my informant's interest in Latin dancing, frankly. The other one, of course, is personal interest. He likes it. He enjoys salsa, he likes bachata. Every major city in Korea has multiple clubs, and a wide range of dancing styles are accommodated. There are Latin dancing clubs, there's swing dancing clubs, there's K-pop cover dancing clubs. Many top international performers from a variety of dance genres come to South Korea because there's a huge audience here. Physical. Salsa dancing is good exercise. It's better than going to the gym. Steps and patterns and movements are critical to being able to do this. A lot of people like just the physicality. It's a way to stay in shape. Social is the biggest thing. Different people attend the events. It's a great way for my informant and his Korean friends to meet foreigners, for example. My informant could speak English. There are parties, there are sports days, there are MTs, all, of course, a big part of Korean culture, macro culture as well as microculture. Keeping busy, okay, body culture. Anybody who's lived in Korea for a long time understands or should understand what body culture is. But people like to do things and keep busy here. This is not a country of people who want to chill out and sit in the backyard and watch the sunset. That's a generalization, of course, but it's really true, and it's something that that people who have moved here recently need to learn. This place moves fast, and social clubs, whether it's a biking club or a dance club or a Latin dancing club, they will keep you busy in your spare time. And then the last one, of course, is collectivism, because it's a very structured and group-oriented dynamic. It's a leisure activity and a hobby, but what contrasts from the Korean sensibility, from the North American, I will say, sensibility, is that social activities here are very structured and group-oriented. Things are done in groups, and a group identity is really important to the way young Koreans, old Koreans, all ages Koreans relate to their surroundings. These were the conclusions I reached from my 2-month ethnographic study. You can read them, but everything that I discovered through my informant, through the club that he belonged to, really helped make other things make a lot more sense than they would have otherwise. And that's why Korea is such a great place to embark on an ethnography, especially when looking at subcultures, because they are all over the place. Now, obviously, coronavirus has affected things somewhat, but leisure activities in Korea are very organized. There are teams, there are clubs for everything: photography, bicycling, going to the gym, dancing, music. I'm going to do an ethnography on the death metal scene here in South Korea. Things are very organized here, and the question is, if you can meet somebody within a particular subculture that you'll be able to communicate with and talk to, the chances for qualitative research are very large. Of course, there are problems and challenges in terms of finding an informant, and the language barrier in Korea is profound for some of us, and it is a longitudinal project. However, if you look at my interview schedule, if I was less busy than I was at that time, I could have easily interviewed my informant within a few weeks and had all the necessary information. You look at quantitative projects where you're developing a survey on the Likert scale and handing it out to multiple classes, it doesn't take any longer than one of those projects. And it could really be a very good project for teachers, not only to gain some insight into their students, but also gain some insight into the nature of the culture that they live in, whether that's in Korea or any country in the world. And there are cons, I do agree, but I think the pros definitely outweigh the cons, because there is a link between language education and cultural exchange. And one of the reasons why I moved from Canada to the Republic of Korea 13 years ago was to learn about a foreign culture and learn about a society that was different than the one that I was brought up in. And using an ethnography to promote your own personal growth, as well as understanding the society that you live in, will help you understand your students and who they are, where they're coming from, what their culture is, and why they are the way they are, and what your relationship with them can be. So this is just a presentation intended to introduce some of you to the concept of ethnography, and also to encourage you to look into doing an ethnography. It's not as difficult as it might seem to be. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and if you have any questions, please contact me. My contact information is coming up at the end of this PowerPoint slide, and I hope you enjoyed and got something out of what I was talking to you about today. Thank you very much, and stay safe and stay healthy.